Complete spoilers for Outer Wilds and its DLC, Echoes of the Eye, are inbound. If you haven't played this game, please allow yourself the pleasure to do so before you watch this video. Years ago, I spent a bit of time in Sydney. I had a girlfriend. We'd grab coffee in a little place next to the train station in Summerhill. It didn't work out, life took its course. But I don't think I ever really let it go. Years later, on the other end of the world, I found myself on Google Maps, looking at the houses, the eucalyptus trees, the street wires. The place felt painfully close, even closer than it did back when I was there. When the announcement came that Outer Wilds was going to have downloadable content, the general response seemed to consist of equal parts excitement and confusion. The developer was adding something to this perfectly fine-tuned puzzle box with a story that had left precisely enough unsaid. It seemed hermetically sealed. What could this DLC possibly add? Echoes of the Eye ended up not just adding content to the main game, it also cast a different light on the main theme. I guess I'll try to mirror that approach in this video, which is part 2 in my series on Outer Wilds. As any essay on the game will note, Outer Wilds is at times a terrifying experience. Echoes of the Eye only leans further into that by incorporating aspects of the horror genre to tell its story. Alex Beecham, the game's director, summarized the DLC's central idea like this.
But we sort of honed in on this idea that we used as consistently as we could from then on out, which was the idea that the truth is hidden in the dark.
In this video, I want to delve into that key insight a bit deeper. How the DLC for Outer Wilds is about venturing inwards in order to integrate one's shadow. And more than that, it's about showing the cost of ignoring to do so. Yes, the truth is hidden in the dark, but to reckon with it, you often have to turn off the lights yourself.
Uh-oh.
In my previous video on Outer Wilds, I discussed the game's scale, the peculiar combination of miniature and magnitude through which it builds an experience of the sublime. I talked about Edmund Burke, the philosopher who wrote a book on the subject in 1757. The sublime refers to the feelings of astonishment, reverence, wonder, and delight that are brought about by overwhelming natural forces such as storming seas and earthquakes. Burke writes how the sublime experience produces delight, not pleasure, but a sort of delightful horror, a sort of tranquility tinged with terror. I argued that Outer Wilds, in spite of its miniaturized world, continuously produces such feelings. What I left out was the following sentence in Burke's book. Indeed, terror is in all cases whatsoever, either more openly or latently, the ruling principle of the sublime. The sublime, in other words, is never innocent or naive. It's not just about grandeur or magnificence. You really need a sense of terror in order to experience it at all. If you think about it, the idea that the sublime experience is built on terror is quite remarkable. It's kind of odd that seeing terror does not leave us stunned with dread, but with positive emotions like astonishment, reverence, wonder, and satisfaction. When we look at sublime art, there's this double feeling involved. Terror implies the dissolution of human individuality on the one side, but on the other, it provides a sense of power, because the beholder, who's now also the participant, has identified with the source of terror. Take, for example, Caspar David Friedrich's The Sea of Ice. Friedrich depicts this Arctic wasteland in which vast peaks of ice rise up to meet an equally vast frozen sky. The slabs look like these enormous, brutal, frozen teeth. The whole image denies any possibility of life, and indeed, if you look carefully, you'll find the mast of some unfortunate, overturned ship. Arthur Schopenhauer, the famed existentialist philosopher, had something to say about the feeling that this painting gives us. The subject perceives himself on the one hand as an individual, which the slightest touch of these forces can utterly destroy, helpless against powerful nature, dependent, the victim of chance, a vanishing nothing in the presence of stupendous might. So we could ask, why is a feeling like that, well, attractive? Why are we looking at things like this to begin with? To Schopenhauer, it is the fact that we can identify with this terror, thereby incorporating and transcending it. The viewer feels powerless, but at the same time experiences himself as the eternal, peaceful, knowing subject, the condition of the object, and therefore the supporter of this whole world. The vastness of the world which disquieted us before rests now in us. In other words, the sublime arises from the experience that, in some way, we are one with the world, and therefore not oppressed but elevated by its immensity. So what does all of that have to do with Outer Wilds? Well, identifying with this disturbing vastness is what this game is all about. In Outer Wilds, you're a frail body smashed around a solar system, but at the same time, you become intimately aware of the rules through which that solar system operates. All of the terrors you face are part of a predictable system of interacting elements that you slowly peel back. You learn exactly when the claustrophobic lakebed cave on Ember Twin is filling up with sand, or to navigate the fractured surface of Brittle Hollow. The game even dishes out an achievement for landing the model rocket on Adelrock, which involves a good deal of predicting the velocity of both of these objects. In short, you're not just a vulnerable astronaut, you're also a time traveler with increasingly exact knowledge about the state of the game world, and often you come to look at it much like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, with a sense of distanced amusement.
I didn't just survive a wreck. I wasn't just blown up yesterday. I have been stabbed, shot, poisoned, frozen, hung, electrocuted, and burned.
Oh, really?
However, like in that movie, you press on, and ultimately, the game teaches you to become that eternal, peaceful, knowing subject that Schopenhauer talks about. Still, the end of the road to knowledge is something mystical. As one of you put it in the comments, the eye of the universe is shrouded in mystery and represents infinite possibilities. We can't explain it, just like we can't explain why the laws of physics are the way they are. Yet at the end of the game, the player becomes one with this mystical foundation, quite literally influencing the next universe. What Echoes of the Eye adds to this journey is a reflection on a different reaction we could have to terror, and to the fear it causes. What if we used all our technology not to explore outwards, but to pull us inside, to wrap us up in the blankets of the past?
To the degree that you condemn others and find evil in others, you are to that degree unconscious of the same thing in yourself, or at least of the potentiality of it.
Very much in line with the main game, the first horror elements that the player encounters in Echoes of the Eye have to do with a sense of scale. After waiting at the deep space satellite, you suddenly have to scramble to fly directly into a mysterious void obfuscating the sun, clearly setting up the theme of light and shadow. You end up in a dark, high-tech space dock with a language you don't understand and never will, passing through a door that leads to a confusingly wooden room and stepping onto a plateau that turns out to be a raft as it falls into the river, revealing the fossilized ring world. What's remarkable is not just the size of the thing, it's how you move through it. All the planets of Outer Wilds are contiguous, freely explorable. But the Stranger and the mirror image dream world are accessed in a strangely linear way, which to me was paradoxically disorienting. Floating by forests, looking at the planet right above us, this is really the only time in which the game signals a larger world outside our reach, a place we don't really have access to. Very much in the spirit of Outer Wilds, we ultimately get a technological explanation for this. We're moving through a simulation. But the feeling we're in a dream persists. And like in most dreams, this means we're tied to the path they put us on. I mean, that's what nightmares are often about, being part of some situation or scene you cannot control, being stuck in a paralyzed body or moving without wanting to.
Holy fuck. Scared the shit out of me. Sorry for the scream. Oh my god.
This leads to another way in which Echoes builds on Outer Wilds, by reorienting the player to their body. In my previous video, I talked about how Outer Wilds is intensely physical, how powerless all the different ways of dying make you feel. This bodily theme continues here, but almost by inversion. Many of the DLC's puzzles are about the passively fragile body and the wandering, disconnected mind, about these elaborate virtual realities we move through while our physical form is helplessly asleep. In fact, one of the final puzzles is about not having a body anymore, as those watchtower lights come on but there's no ringing because you don't have ears anymore. The experience is deeply unsettling, and that's not in the last place because most of this game is all about our physical form and all the ways in which it can be hurt. Throwing yourself in the campfire to dispose of that annoying mortal coil feels a bit jokish at first, but the realization of being a ghost very much doesn't. This is where the DLC's narrative comes in. In contrast to the Nomai, the Stranger's scientific enthusiasm is a lot more temperamental, perfectly captured by the DLC's visual language that often points to these sublime events. Take the images we see of the Strangers destroying their home planet, this mark they inflicted upon their race that does not need any verbal language to be understood in its immensity. This is also where the theme of identifying with terror really becomes important. And it's not just about external terror. Psychologist Carl Jung had this theory about the shadow, the unconscious and often undesirable aspects of our psychology that, if not recognized and owned, leave our personality impoverished. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. If an inferiority is conscious, one always has a chance to correct it. But if it is repressed and isolated from consciousness, it never gets corrected. Echoes of the Eye is about the consequences of this unwillingness to integrate the shadow, where Outer Wilds is about looking out into the solar system, experiencing the celestial sublime. Echoes of the Eye turns inward, to the terrors of the mind. The universe is a scary place, yes, but the worst nightmares are found inside our heads. The Strangers are engaged in this double bind of both showing and hiding those nightmares. This is a species that is manically projecting their past, their reels scattered all over the Stranger, until it gets too painful. And the player goes from literally projecting this past onto canvas to finally ending up inside the projection. Descending down those spiraling staircases to the ritual rooms, I always felt a bit like I was delving into their subconscious.
It's out of those centers, then, that dreams come. And dreams, of course, will be primarily personally oriented. They will have come from the shadow system mostly.
There's nothing inherently violent or horrific about that dream. In fact, it's peaceful, idyllic, a dream of innocence that has, in time, become a cage, shielding its inhabitants from the uncomfortable touch of reality. They are safe, but helpless. At first glance, they don't seem unhappy in the dream. playing their music, relaxing under the night sky. Looking closer, however, we see one of them is watching a slideshow of home, while being inside that very image they're projecting, as if chasing a memory that can never really be secured. The shadow of this faceless creature inside this carefully manufactured simulacrum was so recognizable, like they needed some distance from their memory in order to see it. Like the screen sometimes is more powerful than the experience itself. Echoes of the Eye makes it clear that the liminal state the strangers are in is nothing to be envious of. In one of the game's alternative endings, the player can end up in the dream world after removing the warp core. How much time has passed? They don't even bother to hunt you anymore. Time passes until your life before is some half-remembered dream. If only you could wake up. It is telling that the whole reason why the strangers built this elaborate dreamscape in the first place was to escape their fear, the terror of mortality. While the main game teaches its players to confront mortality, these creatures ravage their home world and now hover invisibly in space to protect others from what they fear will be the same fate. This too is about projection, the psychological kind. They're unconsciously taking their own unwanted emotions, their own intense recklessness, and attributing them to others. They're the silent protectors of a life lived at all costs. Their nostalgia for the world they themselves destroyed keeps them in a twilight state. And when we release the prisoner, we allow them to finally put an end to that affliction. But first, we learn about the heroic decision of the prisoner to switch off the technology that was used to suppress the call of the Eye, this supernatural invitation to renew the universe, this seemingly sentient offer we never quite get to comprehend. We discover that in doing so, they catalyzed the whole story we have been tracing. But we learn remarkably little about the details. Was this part of a rebellion? Was it something they had planned? Was this person a spiritual leader or an outcast? Maybe the answer is that it doesn't matter. What matters is that they were buried like a slide reel. Not crucified, but stifled. People can be like facts, and it's our decision whether we let them in or not. There was something special about opening that vault, that representation of repressed, locked-up fright. From the moment I discovered it, I found myself weirdly attracted. Finally unlocking it, walking down that long, black corridor with that oppressive low hum in my ears, I realized I was not just exploring the shadow of this fictional race. I was experiencing some part of myself I don't often look at. To then find the cell of this prisoner, not a horrible secret, but more of a tranquil room looking out at the stars, made me understand how the heart of fear is more complicated than we often make it out to be. The fact that the final creature you find there, the same type you've been running from all this time, turns out to be a friend, gave me a sense of comfort I've never quite experienced in a game. But of course, in order to get to that point, we had to let our curiosity trump our fear. We had to fly directly into the darkness. We had to blow out the lights. We had to hide our torch so we couldn't see a thing. And we had to drop that torch, that bubble of fear we'd been carrying around, to walk out into the dark and past its reach. While the strangers literally burned away the stuff they wanted to forget, we delved into their vaults, deeper into their subconscious, to excavate those lost images, those parts they have so expertly locked away. We learn to internalize their fear, to then cross the threshold it creates. Of course, walking into the dark means to figure out that the terror, too, is just a simulation. This results in a familiar doubleness that Outer Wilds is all about. How the game actively deconstructs and reconstructs its own terror is nothing short of remarkable. I would go from this polygonal matrix mode in which I pretty much felt like an all-knowing god and walk back inside the projection bubble and immediately fall back into a state of anxiety about whether I'd get spotted and pursued by a ghost bird. The fact that I understood the terror did not make it any less effective. I guess our minds are strange that way. In the last video, I argued that Outer Wilds is optimistic about technology, as it ultimately is what unlocks the universe and its possibilities. Echoes of the Eye shows that technology can serve many goals. It doesn't only allow us to travel through space, but also to hide away. It can bind us to phantoms of the past, or it can set us free. But before all of that, we have to do this work internally. This is beautifully rendered in the game's ending, which is altered by finishing the DLC. Digging up the grave of this species and its fears, you blow out the candles representing your friends, the nomai, the strangers, and ultimately, yourself. You look up and get the final scare, a ghost right behind you, catching you off guard one last time. But after all, it's only in your head. You simply turn around and it's gone. Back at the campfire, you find the prisoner, standing on the side, in the shadows, allowing you to choose to include them, to integrate the fear they represent into the universe that you are building. What makes the original campfire song so emotionally potent, playing it together with a long-lost ancestor who has influenced your world, is effectively doubled. The altered song is now played not with one, but 2 generations before you, blending together into the realization that the future is not just built on curiosity, but also always on overcoming fear. Personally, I do feel that. The curiosity I feel for life, for travel, for meeting people and getting coffee with them near a train station is always accompanied by a shadow of fear and doubt and uncertainty. And only by passing through that every time do I learn to build a better life. A feeling I get in a lot of games is that they attempt to catch terror through a strict commitment to the horror genre. They are scary, but usually do not work through that fear. You may escape from the amnesia monster, or the alien, or the Slender Man, and you might lose some of your fear for them because of the predictability of the encounters, but by the end, you haven't much reflected on the fear itself. What makes Echoes of the Eye so special is that it integrates terror in its design while refusing to become just another horror game. It deconstructs its own terror from the very first time you get caught. The resulting mix of both fear and curious amusement is exactly what I've seen everyone playing this game experience.
Ah! Ah!
But perhaps most importantly, Echoes of the Eye reminded me to look forward and outward instead of walking down those Sydney streets. Projecting the past can wrap us up into something so comforting that we don't want to leave it at all. Maybe that's another reason why the Sublime is so appealing. It shocks us into confronting the world and all its shadows outside our heads. And as Echoes of the Eye shows, that shock can be a first step in facing that other shadow that stares back at us in the mirror. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more. It really helps out a lot. And if you have any ideas on which games you'd like to see me cover next, do let me know in the comments. See you all in the next one.